So good morning, good evening to all of you now attending this webinar. I'm happy to have you with us today, together with Joe Pearman from Mecon and myself. We're going to talk about structured content meets taxonomy. It's a very, I would say, fascinating combination of two topics. Which have developed over the years, first of all on their own, and now finally I think this meetup of two interesting technologies make a lot of sense, and that's what Joe and I will talk about in the next 60 minutes. And we've prepared a lot of demos for you. We are not talking about just the concepts behind. We are really showcasing things and hope that you will have a good hour together with us. We will open up the microphones at the very end of the webinar, which will be in around about 60 minutes, and would be happy to have some of you still in the room so we can discuss live. And in the meantime, I'd like to encourage you to put questions whenever you have any into the chat box of the GoToWebinar application, and we will also have a quick break or a break somewhere in between and try to give you answers on your questions. So that's a little bit of organizational stuff. You can also download the slides of this presentation in the download section of GoToWebinar, and in any case you will receive a follow-up email with some links. There will be a YouTube video of this session and also the slides once again on slideshare.net. Okay, so let's start. I'd like to come up first of all with the agenda. So we will start with a short introduction of ourselves, and then we're talking about first of all why embedded semantics. After this short introduction to this fundamental question, Joe will take over and talk about what is structured content in general and why does structured content need taxonomies and semantic technologies. Later, I will come up with an example how people can or organizations can benefit from this technology stack, for instance, when creating question answering engines. And we'll talk also about knowledge graphs, how to create those, and how you can benefit from semantics in general. So we will start with a brief introduction. First, my name is Andreas. I'm CEO of Semantic Web company. We are headquartered in Vienna, Austria, and we're the developers and vendors of a platform, a semantic middleware called Poolparty. And Poolparty, it's based on W3C standards. W3C has been developing semantic web standards for over 10 years now, and one of those standards is the SCOS standard. That's one part of the semantic web which is heavily used by the Poolparty semantic suite, which is, beside other features, a tool you mainly would use to create and maintain knowledge graphs, but also for other purposes like data integration and text mining. I will now hand over to Joe.
So hi everyone. So I'm going to talk about structured content, and the way I cut my teeth in this structured content stuff was at HTC, the smartphone manufacturer in Taiwan, now doing very well in the virtual reality space. And so when I joined HTC, they were producing user education content that was very kind of print oriented in InDesign, and they needed high quality search optimized web content as well as still the print content. They needed to share content across the enterprise and even across various internal knowledge bases and so on. So when I introduced structured content technologies, and particularly a standard called DITA XML that I'll mention a bit later, this basically enabled us to do all this at scale. And so we're able to deliver content to a mobile delivery platform, an application we had on the devices themselves. Had lots of localization and web delivery challenges that we solved. And then we also did lots of interesting stuff with knowledge management. So I did that for about 6 years, and then decided to take on fresh challenges at Mecon, who have been involved in the structured content space for a good 20 years now. And Mecon's based in London in the UK, but we do work for clients all over the globe. And they're in a lot of different industries and domains, but the thing that unites them is that they deal with complex content problems. So it's often kind of technical or regulatory content, or it could even be marketing content that they need to improve the user experience for, and the links between different bits of content. So we help with all that. So first of all, we help with thinking, do you even need this structured content stuff in the first place? Help you think around that. What's the technology that would be suitable? And increasingly now, of course, we're working also with semantic technologies in this context, and particularly with pool party, as we'll show later. Okay.
Thank you, Joe. Good. So that was this quick introduction of ourselves, and I will now come to the first topic, which is about embedded semantics, from structured to semantic content authoring. So it's rather a quick intro to the whole topic. So what is our fundamental assumption when we're talking about this? I think we should get rid a little bit of the idea that at any time we are looking for documents only. Of course, we are a little bit biased after 20 years of internet search. We are somehow used to the idea we are looking for documents. But isn't it the case that we also rather need facts and smaller chunks of information? We want to have a quick answer to a maybe complex question. That's what we are looking for. And if you look at the architecture behind semantics and structured content, we will find out quickly that that's actually a very, very good precondition to do so. Machines should help to create links between those smaller chunks of information, which then as a combined whole can give answers to concrete questions. That's the fundamental assumption. That's why we're talking about this. And another, I think, basic idea really is that we are pretty used to the idea that semantic technologies might be applied at the very end of a content lifecycle. It's kind of a semantic re-engineering. So we are not really spending a whole lot of attention to create meaningful information in a sense. And at the end, we hope that some great machine learning facilities will help us to re-engineer the semantics. That's probably not the very best idea. Why not creating semantics from the very beginning of a content lifecycle? And we will touch all those points. Yeah, we will show how semantics can be already embedded when content is created, why it helps to do content linking, of course, content publishing like schema.org, SEO activities benefit from that, of course, retrieval, that's one of the low-hanging fruit, semantic search, but even content quality can benefit a lot from embedded semantics, which means that by applying the appropriate queries, you can find out certain, for instance, inconsistencies in your content, in your structured content mainly. And another basic assumption I'd like to bring up at the very beginning is that we should make a clear distinction between metadata and semantics. So many of you might be very much familiar to the idea of maintaining metadata on top of several content repositories in a maybe even harmonized and consistent way. But still, this is not good enough to retrieve and content in a very fine-grained way, or even to give answers to rather complex questions. You need to maintain a semantic layer on top. And I'm pretty sure you're worried about the idea of having to heavily invest in the creation, maintenance of the semantic layer. That's one of the bottlenecks, and I agree. It's nothing which can be automatically generated by a black box you just install beside your content repositories. You need to somehow maintain the semantic layer. But what I also want to show you in the course of this webinar is that there's many ways that you can semi-automatically create and maintain the semantic layer. So now I'm going to hand over to Joe. So we will switch over to Joe's monitor. 1 second, please.
Okay, thanks, Andreas. So what actually is structured content, and why do people use it in the first place? And it's an odd kind of a definition here because it's easiest to define it by what it's not. It's not really kind of like whole web pages where you're editing in a CMS and you just have this big field called body that you can kind of apply formatting to, but not much intelligence. So it's not really structured content. It's not whole documents. It's not Word documents, PowerPoints, PDFs, that kind of thing, or whole books. It can become those things. And just to mention that I'm not saying there's anything wrong with working in those ways, but there are certain benefits to working with structured content that you only get when you work with sub-publication chunks, so chunks that are smaller than a whole document. Could be sections with a heading or a subheading, possibly. It could be smaller chunks such as paragraphs, tables, and figures. It could even be chunks such as individual words and phrases, meaningful words and phrases that you want to connect with real stuff in the outside world. And the key thing about these chunks is that it's not just that you're chopping things into tiny pieces, it's that they're actually kind of meaningful chunks. So in some way they are semantic. I'm going to qualify that later. It's not quite semantic in the way that we'll talk about later, but what they are tagged with is the type of information that's within them, these little chunks. So let me give you an example of what that actually looks like. Now, typically structured content is created in XML. Typically, authors don't have to look at this stuff. Nevertheless, it helps to make some points clearer if we do have a look at some of the back end behind this stuff. So just to mention, you know, half the time when you're working with structured content, most of the time you won't see this. Nevertheless, this is just to give you an example. So here we have a topic, as we call it, which is basically like a small article. And it's about the viewfinder screen on a phone. And we see that because it's in this title element. We've also got other chunks marked up. We've got this thing called a fig or a figure. And inside the fig, we've got this image, we've got this simple table, we've got a paragraph, which are all related to each other within the figure. So these are semantic chunks in some way, at least to the extent that we're saying what type of information they contain. And I want to compare that with, if I did this same document as a Word document, and if I actually looked at the code behind it, because actually Word uses XML too, but in a very, very different way, and we would still call that unstructured, to be honest. So when you open up a Word document as XML, you see all this kind of formatting stuff, Arial, Times New Roman, font sizes, colors, all of this kind of stuff. And that basically means there's no intelligence. It's not telling you what type of information is contained in here. It's just how it should look at any one time. Fine for some purposes. It just means you're limited in the extent to which you can reuse it. So it's not what we would call structured content. So what do we actually use this for? Now, I really like Andreas's focus on answers. And answers depend on good quality content. Answers can be as simple as a single fact, a single data point. They can also be more complicated. What if somebody wants to get a good overview over a system kind of architecture or a whole product or a set of rules or something like this? And so structured content can help us focus on content quality, first of all. By using these kind of templates, this idea of what chunks should go where, we can get some degree of consistency. And readers really appreciate this. So here we have two very similar topics. One's about a viewfinder screen, one's about a music function, and they have a similar structure. And people appreciate that in general with web content these days, such as on Wikipedia, you have always for each article, whether it's short or long, you have your introduction. At the end, you have your references, you'll see also your bibliography and so on. And people really appreciate that kind of consistent structure, so that they can quickly find and identify the information they need. So how does structured content help authors to work within these kinds of templates. Here's an example of a very simple structured content CMS. It's called Contentful. It has its limitations, but nevertheless, it's a very friendly environment to work in. And you can see the authors writing in here get prompts for what are the pieces of information they need to put in, how much information should they provide, and so on and so on. So they get some nice inline guidance there. And that's all because this is treated in a structured way, and these chunks are typed according to the information they contain. If you start here with a blank template for one of these screen descriptions, you'll see the required information, and down at the bottom you can even see that it's requiring an image here. So very easy for any author to contribute to this in a structured and consistent way, and to know what's expected of them, what's expected of a consistent answer that conforms to this kind of a template. Okay, so it does help authors. There is also a kind of a side benefit. Actually, for many of our clients, it's one of the main benefits. But because you start with this XML structure and you're not saying how things should look, you're able to easily produce multiple outputs from that. And we know that readers sometimes like to get information on their phones. Sometimes they even like to download a PDF still. And with a single XML source, you can easily produce any of those outputs and recombine them as you like. And so you remember that within the figure, we had that image and that table. And so on the phone, the table is under the image to leave space. In PDF and on desktop, the table is floated to the right of the image. And it's very easy because you understand that they all relate to that same figure element. And also you can, of course, tweak formatting and so on. So that's one of the benefits. Other benefits are the ability to actually swap out little chunks of information as you need. So perhaps these various features don't apply to all kinds of phones. Perhaps a high-end phone has them all, perhaps a budget phone doesn't have all of them. Or perhaps users have certain preferences to say, I need this information, but not other bits. And again, with structured content, you can filter that in and out as necessary for different users. What you do need is slightly more metadata than what I showed you just now. You would need to add IDs for each of these things so that you can control them and turn them on and off. And Ditto XML, that standard that I mentioned that we do quite a lot of work with, it has mechanisms for doing this kind of stuff. So here I've tagged the topic up with these bits of metadata. Each table row can be turned on or off and filtered in or out with a file such as this to say that, for example, for a budget phone, I'm including certain features, autofocus, photo video mode, and so on, but not other features that don't apply. So that's making content production more efficient. Again, from a single source, I'm getting various different flavors of output. And it's also helping to tailor content to what users actually expect. They're not seeing very generic information when they have a particular case. In fact, this idea of labeling chunks of information goes further than that. And you can pull them out independently and show them in different contexts. Perhaps aggregate all the introductions or short descriptions for your content on a big kind of topic page or something like that. So here's a snippet of a schema for actually a troubleshooting template. And it's got, like so many Ditto topics, it's got a short description here. And what happens when you publish out the short description? In HTML output, it becomes not only part of the visible content, but also one of the metadata links in the head of the page. And it's the meta description tag, which Google tends to use to show as the search snippet. So if you're searching for information, Google is likely to pull out that little snippet and show it as the link preview to give you a good idea of what you're going to get if you click that link. So it's very useful to have this actually. And you can see here an example of where these tags don't seem to have been used, and we're looking for hard resetting a phone. And for the Samsung information, it doesn't seem to have much of that, not much tagging, and certainly none from Samsung themselves. And on HTC, I happen to know that we did this tagging, and so we're able to surface relevant information here. And this is really important, not only for external search, but also internal searches. You know, it could be within an intranet for private content, or at least content within your own organization. and your search feature can still surface these little snippets to let people know what they can expect when they click it. And just quickly coming back to content quality and the idea that we should be writing good quality answers in the first place. Forcing authors to write a little introduction like this really focuses the mind. And if you find yourself writing a topic that you can't think of a good introduction for, actually perhaps that's an indication that the topic itself doesn't need to be written or should be reconsidered. So again, it's a kind of a check on content quality. But one of the things about these little snippets is it's really important to use various different terms within them. Because users don't always use the same language for a feature. They don't always use your organization's official terms for things. They have their own terms. And so we knew at HTC from various kind of data analysis that people were using hard reset sometimes, which was the official term, but also factory reset or master reset. So we included all that information in this snippet and we surfaced it here. So that even if you search for HTC factory reset, you're going to get a relevant result, and the reader can see a relevant term that he or she can respond to there. So word choice is critical. So that's about structured content itself, but there's a bit of a gap. Why does it need taxonomy and semantic technologies to add to it? We've seen that it helps us formulate these nice templatized answers. And it helps us personalize those answers and even label individual chunks and facts within the answers so we can pull them out independently. But structured content technologies aren't really helping us to coordinate all these labels and names that we're using for bits of information. And they're certainly not telling other machines and systems what the content is actually about. It's telling them about the type of information, but it's not really saying what they're actually about. What's the real world stuff that they connect to in such a way that those other systems can make use of it effectively. So how can taxonomy help? So taxonomies are three things really. They're a way of basically storing information about relevant things to our organizations. It could be names of people, it could be names of product parts, it could be actions, it could be relationships between things, whatever is important to you and your organization. It's also a way of keeping track of names for those things, and not only one name, but perhaps several names. And finally, it's a way of keeping track of relationships between these important things in your organization. So just coming back to that second point, the various names that you have for something. So you remember just now we looked at the hard reset topic and the fact that it's useful to use different language. So if you are managing this information in a taxonomy management system such as Pool Party, you can actually store these alternative labels, as we call them, alongside the preferred label. And so if authors refer to this, they can see what they should be adding to that information so that users can find their own preferred terms for things. In fact, it can go further than that. Rather than authors actively having to look up the information, if you integrate taxonomy management tools with a structured content authoring tool, you can have automatic checks to say, well, we know you're writing a topic about hard reset, but we know that you haven't yet used these appropriate alternative labels. So it will prompt you to put them in, and then you can decide where to put them. So it can actively help authors improve content quality. The taxonomy is bigger than just a kind of an unrelated list of these things. As I said, it's also about the relationships between concepts. So I'm going to switch over the subject domain now to an example that I'm going to make use of later. And so this is for a fictitious food processor company, and it makes its money selling food processor attachments. And there's kind of content marketing. It's producing a lot of recipes for its website. And so it's got a taxonomy around not only the food processor attachments themselves, but also ingredients. And those are subcategorized, as you can see. Within dairy, we've got butter, cheese, types of cheese, and so on and so on. And we've got food preparation techniques and food processing methods there. So this is all within the taxonomy. So the taxonomy is describing these relationships. In fact, you can go on to define richer ontology relationships as well that are more specific, but this is just a very simple taxonomy here. So it relates concepts to each other. And what can we do with these concepts apart from just referring to names and stuff? A concept at minimum consists of a preferred label and a unique ID. And if it's a standards-based taxonomy, it's going to be in URI format, so a universal resource indicator, which looks a bit like this. And what do we do with this thing? Very often we're going to tag our topics with what they're actually about. So if I have a topic about a shaved ice recipe, we'll see such a topic in just a minute, I can tag it with this URI, and it's going to know it's about shaved ice. My delivery platform, my website, or my knowledge base, or whatever it is, also has access to the whole taxonomy and all of its labels, and it's showing these labels separately. It knows what content is in there. Because it's got a page that has this particular URI, it matches that against the shaved ice label and shows that it has one page about shaved ice. So why this complexity? Why didn't we just label this page with shaved ice itself, the string, and just bring that in as such? Well, first of all, in that way, other systems couldn't read it very easily, not consistently. And second, you might actually want to change that term shaved ice. You might want to say, well, shaved brackets ice, for example, just like this. And with this method, the concept tag in the page stays exactly the same, but you can update the website straight away just by updating your taxonomy, and it will keep track of that. So you don't have to change the content. You might have 200 recipes about shaved ice, but you don't have to change any of those. You just update the label once, and it updates wherever you are displaying that. Similarly, if you wanted to put shaved ice in a subcategory under food processing, that could just update as well. So here we have it under the category there. So that's a best practice for using taxonomies in structured content, or really any content. So what can we do that's special about structured content with taxonomy? Because as we remember, structured content is about chunks of content, not just whole topics or documents. So I've got a couple of examples of how we can do that. Here's an example from a joint client of ours and pool parties. This is Talent, who make kind of big data integration software, doing very well in this, and they're modernizing their help content so it's more easily searchable across the board. They have very detailed content about a wide range of products. So they have this enterprise-wide taxonomy about the products, about the modules within them, and all the things that people do with them, and that's connected into their structured content authoring tools. So an author can actually tag any chunk of content to say what product it applies to, what operating system it applies to, or something like that. And so here's an example. You remember I showed earlier an XML topic, and I'm saying you can get 2 for 1 basically, or as many as you like for one out of the same XML source. The same applies to these conditions. So here is what looks like a page about Windows, using a particular product on Windows, and it's got file paths that apply to Windows. Here is what looks like another page from Talent, and it's got file paths that apply to Mac instead. And in fact, these are both coming from exactly the same XML source, and they're both tagged according to the operating system. Chunks of content are tagged according to the operating system that they apply. They're tagged in conjunction with the taxonomy, so they're keeping track of all these labels for stuff, and they're able to filter it in or out at publish time. So it's very efficient, and it's also nice and accurate for users. Users don't have to look through a vast swathe of content to find the exact information they're looking for. So that's one simple example. Here's a slightly more elaborate example, and it's the content marketing proof of concept that I was mentioning earlier. And this was pulled together. The concept came from ourselves and the content, but also we're using Pool Party taxonomy management, of course, which is integrated with a tool called Fonto.xml, which makes structured content authoring quite easy, but also quite powerful, as you'll see in a second. And also a dynamic delivery platform, so for basically delivering structured content in a way that makes it really easy to filter and find relevant information and display it appropriately. And that's from our sister company, Congility. Okay, the product is called DittaWeb, by the way. So I said it was about content marketing. Here's an example of Kenwood, who are also doing the same kind of thing, and they have some really nice recipes on their site. But what I found that they could perhaps do better is when you're reading the recipe, you don't really see what products apply to it. And you have to go all the way up here to the top right to actually see the product and click on it. I thought we could help to pull this information together in a more contextual kind of a way. So we start with that recipe taxonomy that I showed you earlier. And we assume that we have some technical authors who are writing the product documentation in a fairly techie structured content authoring tool. So this is about one of those attachments, the ice shaver disk. And the relevant thing here is to say that I'm tagging this whole topic with this concept, which I know is about the shaving ice concept. So I understand all of this is somehow about this action of shaving ice. So that's as far as I go with that content. But of course, marketing writers, the ones writing the recipes, are not going to be so happy to use a highly techie tool like that. So here's where Fonto.xml comes in. And it looks a lot more like Word, but it's browser based, so it's quite lightweight and easy to use. Here's that shaved ice recipe. I'm going to skip down to applesauce sweet potato bake. Let's say I'm just an author now, and I look at this 1 jar applesauce, and I say, well, my readers, they're not going to buy shop bought applesauce. They're going to make their own applesauce. So let's say instead 4 apples. And what I can do here, I get this thing that looks like a spell check match, and I can actually connect it to the taxonomy concept about apples. I can either connect it to apples directly, or it's found these more specific terms, these narrow terms, if you like, from the taxonomy. And it's saying, well, do you actually mean Granny Smiths or Bramleys or Golden Delicious? And Granny Smiths cook down really well. They're a slightly tart apple that are good for cooking. So I'm actually going to pick that, and it replaces the text there. So it's helping me as an author. I'm just going to show you it's actually made that link to the taxonomy here, and I can browse that taxonomy concept there. So I've put that in, and I can just say something here like blend the apples until smooth. And again, I can do something like connect blend with the taxonomy concepts that applies to. Okay, and I'm looking up at my strawberry coconut shaved ice here, and I've got instructions, and similarly I've got this thing about shave the ice into your food processor bowl, and it's got this concept of shaving ice there. So I've now got a match. I have my tech authors writing about the shaving ice disk and tagging that with this concept. Here I've got right in line on this actual word shave, I've tagged it with this, exactly the same concept from the taxonomy. And I can use that information about this shared content to drive automatic links between them. Let me show you how that looks in Mekon Chef. So this is based on the DitaWeb dynamic delivery platform. And I'm showing this strawberry coconut shaved ice recipe here. And as a reader, I'm reading through, and I'm seeing shave the ice into your food processor bowl. So how do I shave ice? Now, if I didn't know, I might think I have to get some ice cubes, get my hand grater, start grating away, get cold water down my sleeve. It sounds quite unpleasant, but I see this is underlined. It's actually a hyperlink, so I can click on it, and here I get this useful information about the ice shaver disk product. So I see there's something that can help me do this. So I can either just go back to the recipe and continue, or if I'm interested, I can click through to the actual product there. And this is that piece of the tech docs that I saw earlier. So this is quite relevant. If I read through this and I like what I see, then I can click add to cart and just buy this attachment directly. So that link is maintained completely automatically. If I don't actually have the tech docs for this just yet, there's going to be no broken link. It's just not going to display. Correspondingly, if I find this attachment page from a Google search, I can click through to the recipe. So it's a bi-directional link. And again, that's completely automatic. And even when we come to things like faceted search, like drilling down on the various recipes, I've only got a few in here for now, but I can see, for example, if I click on blend, then because I had tagged up that applesauce sweet potato bake with blend earlier, that's also showing up for me. And again, these are maintained automatically. So fairly easy for authors. In fact, it actually helps the authors to put relevant content in, and then you get this automatic linking as a benefit of the at the end of it, just by linking the actual content to the real world entities it applies to. Okay, thanks. So Andreas, I'll pass back to you. I wonder if we have any questions just at the moment. I think somebody did put their hand up.
Thanks, Joe. That was really good, and I'd like now to continue. Just try to get back to the screen, right? And here we go. Should be visible now again. Good. So what we've seen by Joe's demo of several applications is, in the background you have some taxonomies or even more complex knowledge graphs at hand. So those drive more or less the content authoring process and the way it's going to be published later, searched, linked and stuff. So obviously a very important question is also, how can such knowledge graphs be created, and what else is going to be repaired, so to speak, when you have a knowledge graph in place, in contrast to just having structured content available. So let me show you an example. What I have here on this slide are short biographies of politicians. So several mayors of different cities might be described like that. Also corresponding political parties maybe. And so what's really the problem with that? Why is that not sufficient? So Joe already tackled a couple of issues, like using names for things consistently, but still allowing synonyms and keeping all the names up to date. So the housekeeping for the names and labels of things are really clearly separated from the metadata layer. It happens in the semantic layer. Also, the relations between those things are maintained in the semantic layer, totally independent from the content actually. So it's always true that, for instance, Michael Müller is a member of the Social Democratic Party. You don't need to put that in a content layer, or it's just a matter of fact. It's knowledge. That's why we call it knowledge graph. And then later, of course, we would like to filter and aggregate several content items along hierarchies. So we would like to make use of such hierarchies we've built out in the knowledge graph and in taxonomies and aggregate things automatically. I will also come to that point later. And then, as I've mentioned at the beginning, we would also like to extract facts from documents automatically. It should be machine processable in a way. And also what we mentioned before, Joe did as well, like how can we do automatic content quality checks? Again, the knowledge graph is a very helpful background information. And last but not least, how can we provide answers to complex questions? So that's what I'm going to focus now on. You see here a couple of more mayors, like Sadiq Khan of London, Michael Müller of Berlin, Virginia Raggi of Rome, and so on and so forth. And let's assume we would like now to find out which mayors in capital cities of the EU, European Union, belong to social democratic parties. There's not a sufficient information for that. Because, and all that's also true for all the other questions I might have, because I always need to answer a lot of other questions beforehand. So that's always a precondition. So for instance, in order to find out question 1, I also need to know which city is a capital city, which city belongs to which country belongs to the European Union, and so on and so forth. So obviously, there's a strong need for background knowledge. We need to maintain and store the ground truth, so to speak, for our domain somewhere else. You wouldn't find it in the content, and it doesn't make sense again and again to create this kind of knowledge. It's on a different level. You would like to combine it with the actual content in a way that it can be done automatically and that it can be processed by machines. So obviously there's a standard for that, and the standard is called the Semantic Web. And I will show you step by step how they could work. So let's assume we have a document about Michael Müller. Okay, great. We can transform that quite quickly into RDF. RDF, the resource description framework, consists of triples. A triple is a simple fact. And if you build up a semantic web, it's a network of facts, so to speak. So what you see here, as Joe already talked about, URIs, again, you will see them here. So you see that's the URI of Michael Müller. Okay, Michael Müller is a politician. Michael Müller has his first name, or his preferred name is Michael Müller, obviously. He's the leader of, and here we come to the next business object or entity or concept, you can name it however you like, and that's in that case Berlin. Okay, so that can be visualized nicely down here, so that's probably helpful. So this can be visualized as a little snippet of a knowledge graph in that way. So Michael Müller, he's a politician, he belongs to a party, he belongs to a certain religion, and he serves for a certain place. Great. Next document is about his political party he's member of. So one tricky part already is, okay, how can we link those? How can we find out that this SPD party is the same like the Social Democratic Party? Is it the same? Well, okay. In any case, if we have that built out as a knowledge graph, it's linked. So it's already on its own a little knowledge base. Of course, this links between the things would have names as well. So they have even, again, URIs in the semantic web, but I didn't want to put them here in this visualization just not to make it too complex. But this link here has a meaning. It's not just a link. It has a meaning, and you describe that by using an ontology. And now the really clever part is that you can now easily combine the triples, the facts you've derived from your XML documents. You can link those to your knowledge base, to your background knowledge, to the ground truth, however you want to call that, which could be your taxonomy. And in your taxonomy, you might find things like that Germany is part of the European Union, or you might find things like this Berlin is the same as that Berlin on another graph, which might be DPpedia. DPpedia, the semantic sister of Wikipedia. And here you find how many inhabitants Berlin has, 3.6 million, which then later will help you to give answers to those complex queries I just mentioned before. So you see, you don't have to reinvent again and again the same wheel. You can reuse that, for instance, geographic taxonomies, or in pharmaceutical industry, I don't know, gene ontology or UniProt or some other graphs which are just building the ground truth. And for nearly any industry, you can find such and then later link and combine it with the content. And by that, you can create a great knowledge base, for instance, to build out a help desk for your customers, as one example. So I will give you a brief live demo of that. So that's the pool party Desoro server. I already logged in, and I've already loaded the politics taxonomy for that reason. So here, for instance, you see there are several concept schemes like people and politicians. You see here, for instance, Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London. You see that's a classified thing, so it's a person, it's a politician. You can also look up the concept scheme here. In that case, a custom scheme which describes the specific relations a politician could have. For instance, he has a profession, in that case, a lawyer. He's a leader of a certain city. I can click on London. So here again, I see the simple SCOS view with all the different labels Joe already mentioned before. And I also see here the broader concept, so it's part of the United Kingdom. And here, for instance, I see a mapping to DPpedia, and from there, if I've stored it in the same graph, or in the same triple store, or maybe in a remote store, I can still fetch data from DPpedia and link it to my own taxonomy, and so on and so forth. I can even visualize that if I like. so I can browse around and get some nice impression how things are related to each other. So in any case, here I've built all these triples partly manually. So the facts that, for instance, London is part of the United Kingdom was more or less generated manually, but still I can create a lot of things automatically. So for instance, I can analyze short biographies. I can go to, again, Sadiq Khan, look up documents and find a short biography here, and I see instantly there were several things extracted, so I can automatically detect that Sadiq Khan is a lawyer and he believes in Sunni Islam, he belongs to the Labour Party, and so on. So here are several types of concepts extracted here. By the way, you see the so-called shadow concepts, which is kind of an indirect link through other connections I can calculate out of large text corpora. Any case, so those are automatically generated facts, and also my link I created to the DBpedia concept I can do automatically, and from there I could fetch things like birth date and stuff. So lots of things can be generated automatically, and later if I store that in a triple store like MarkLogic, I can now do all these queries I mentioned before, like which mayors in European cities with more than 500,000 inhabitants are female. What you can expect from having the graph in a triple store, of course, is that you can formulate queries based on Sparkle. It's a query language for knowledge graphs, and quickly you can write a complex query. And if you compare that to other query languages, it's something you can execute, for instance, joins between things quickly. You can traverse hierarchies with one single operator and things like that. So this brings me back to Joe, and Joe would like also quickly talk about how to use those DBpedia annotations together with schema.org.
So yeah, I just wanted to mention again, as I was talking about search engine optimization earlier, one particular application of this. So Andreas has just talked about DBpedia, the semantic equivalent of Wikipedia, because Wikipedia talks about so very many real world entities. DBpedia has the equivalents in semantic format. And so you can actually use this information. So this is the concept of shaved ice that I showed earlier, and we attached it to the recipe itself at the point where we mentioned shave. So Andreas, if you could spool forward to the next slide. So we can use that because we have connected the taxonomy to the authoring tool and the authoring tool to the actual publication platform. We can use that DBpedia information to enhance our HTML markup, so Google can actually make use of that. So that when Google comes across this word shave, as we can see here, it actually understands it's talking about shaved ice because of this markup, and not something like perhaps shaving your face or something like that. And below, as we see, it's identifying cream of coconut, although perhaps that's not so ambiguous. So it's a very useful example of how we can apply this. This example was actually proven to work by Jarno van Driel, who's a semantic search expert. He did some research. He's got a very good blog post on that demonstrates how Google is actually picking up these semantic cues to disambiguate content. Okay, thanks, Andreas.
Thanks, Joe. So let me go back to the question also how the creation of knowledge graphs might look like. So we had a quick impression into how Pool Party can help you build out taxonomies. Maybe I come up with another example. Let's assume the United Kingdom would like to join back to the European Union. So I can simply drag and drop that, and it's going to be put back into this hierarchy. And that's something, of course, you see it's always centered around those triples around nodes in a graph. And any relation you had before, of course, is also updated by that. So there's no need to do all the new links which then occur again and again. It's really about things, how they are related to each other, and in this large network of things you can quickly delete or create a new relation. In politics, of course, it's not that quickly done, as we all see currently, but in the taxonomy environment like pool party, it's a bit easier to swap around such things. And that's one way you can create facts and triples. And the other one I'd like to stress out is really to make use of linked data sources. So one question we had in our chat box was about geographical entities, how they can be embedded in a taxonomy like that. So a good way to do so are linked open data sources. So Pool Party as a semantic middleware can nicely integrate with a diverse linked data environment. So you can come up with connections to several triple store. So now we see why it didn't work. Obviously, there's a broken link, so only this triple store currently is connected with. So maybe a misconfiguration has happened. Yeah, that's the reason. Okay, now we know it better. So it's no need to worry about Mark Logic. This software works greatly. It's rather the link between Pool Party and the corresponding Mark Logic server here is currently not configured. Maybe we do that in another webinar. In any case, you can here also, for instance, attach to geonames that's currently available, or to DBpedia, all the different language types or Getty vocabularies, Library of Concrete subject headings, Thomson Reuters, Perm ID, and so on and so forth. So you can set up links to various linked data sources and enrich your graph and link to those corresponding entities from there. As I did, for instance, again here, if you look up the linked data tab, Sadiq Khan, I can now fetch data from there if I like. I could also just leave it where it is and come up with a federated query later. So that's also, so for instance, you see here when Sadiq Khan was born, which was the 8th of October in 1970. And I can fetch that now and put it into my local version if I like. And of course, I can keep that in sync by appropriate data transformation pipelines. So apropos, data transformation pipeline, that's something you could maintain with Pool Party Unified Views. That's a component where you can set up transformation between a source and another store, which means, for instance, you have facts in a relational database in your XML repository, and with Unified Views, you can fetch the data from there, orchestrate the transformations, the merge between several data transformation pipelines, and you can put all that resulting triples into one triple store. It's a great way to automate the triplification of your data, and by using taxonomies in the background, the data will stay consistent. And then, of course, if it's mainly about unstructured content, maybe parts of your XML document or just PDFs, whatever, then a nice mechanism called power tagging could help you to transform those documents into RDF by extracting the entities, and the entities then, of course, have a lot of information stored in the knowledge graphs, as already mentioned. And last but not least, I already showed you quickly how the corpus analysis can help to create triples in the background. So here we also embedded machine learning components and algorithms which help to find out the most relevant concepts and relations between those. That's mainly done based on statistics and natural language processing. So as you see, I would say a large portion of the knowledge graph you're keeping in your linked data warehouse is not necessarily something you create from scratch and only manually. So again, that's a bit of an impression how the whole system also is kind of a supervised learning system. One of the crucial components here really is this Corpus learning module, which constantly analyzes content from your technical documentation, from your incoming news, whatever. And from there, the system will help you to update and extend the existing knowledge graph. And you also see there are several types of roles involved. It's the taxonomist, it's the content manager, and probably the integrator. And all of those components have or provide RESTful APIs. So as a middleware, of course, you always tend to integrate semantics into your content workflows. Again, I'd like to encourage you to try it out on your own. So there is a test server of Poolparty. I think the demo you've already seen. Just wanted to put it back into your memory. If you want to try it out, please feel free to register for a test account on poolparty.biz. And now finally, I'd like to come more or less to an end. And there are a couple of things we are frequently asked. So one is really, okay, how can I integrate a semantic engine like Poolparty into a CMS or digital asset management system? There's a frequently asked question. And basically, you've got two options. Option one is that you're going to push back the links by using the URIs of the things you created in your knowledge graph back to the CMS. Okay, that's an obvious one, and it's already quite helpful. The linked data approach rather would use an RDF store. You could call it master data store. And this master data here is linking back to the actual digital asset management system or content management system. So you see the link back here indicates that you're not necessarily store the blob or the whole content in the RDF store, but just the links between the things and the assets and the content you've created in the course of your content creation workflow. So that's what indicated here, and you can imagine this opens up quite nicely the option to integrate information from a huge variety of systems. So this RDF store then really ties together all the objects in your different repositories. They could look like that. In a SharePoint environment, you might have an application server which does the tagging automatically for you. So that's actually our power tagging solution for SharePoint and Office 365. If you push the tag events into a linked data warehouse, where you have already the taxonomies and maybe other knowledge graphs stored, you then can do a lot of complex analytics and queries on top you couldn't have done only with probably a simple faceted search or semantic search engine. But that's the really benefit you gain from having all that content in a more structured way and semantically enriched and linked to knowledge graphs.
And Andreas, I just wanted to quickly jump in if that's okay.
Sure.
Just wanted to mention this idea of linking content, structured and unstructured semantically, can be a really kind of agile and lightweight way of doing things. And a few years ago, us in the structured content business were trying to evangelize that everybody should use this kind of XML structure for all of their documents, even kind of notes on the intranet or whatever. And clearly that was going to be a bit too heavyweight to work, and not all content benefits from that heavy structure. But nevertheless, if you can link it together with consistent taxonomy and semantic technologies, then that could be a really good way to get everybody working together across the enterprise. Just wanted to talk about that.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, so this demo I tried to show you. I promise next time, maybe if you want to contact us, I will show you that it works. So there was obviously some troubles with the connector. Well, I hope that was interesting to you. I would like to sum up with a couple of options, what you could do next. If you're interested in more details, one good vehicle to work together would be a Semantic Web starter kit. We do that frequently with prospect clients who would like to learn quickly, become productive quickly in that area. And it can nicely be combined with a content audit. Joe, would you like to briefly talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Just quickly to say that, as I've indicated, there are lots of potential benefits of structured content, various tools you can work with from simple to complex. And at the end of the day, perhaps not all your content needs to be structured in the first place. So people quite often come to us with questions around that, sometimes quite specific, sometimes the general, like, do we even need structured content? So what we'll typically do is just a few days work to identify, we call it a content strategy checkup, to identify, what parts of your content would work well with these technologies. And what's the best approach to do that with. And then I can see that flowing really, really well into, and this is how we've worked in the past, that this would flow very well into this Semantic Web starter kit, where we're actually trying out the technologies for real, hands-on, and finding out how they work and learning from that. That's a crucial piece of the puzzle, I would say.
Cool. Good. So last but not least, feel free to register for a test account of Pool Party. So that can be done on our website quickly. And there's also the Academy available if you want to do an e-learning certificate course. You can find that on poolparty.biz/academy. There are 3 tracks, learning tracks. And the first one, the Semantic Technologies training, is for free. 2 others, please feel free to reach out to us and we can find a way to let you in. Yeah, so that was it. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. Thanks for your attention. And Joe, do you want to say some words at the end as well?
Oh, no. Well, thanks everybody for joining. And we had a few questions and we'll be following up with those and hope to be able to talk with you soon. Okay, thank you. So
thanks again. We have a couple of questions we will now cover. So for those of you who want to stay in the room, we also will open up the microphone in a couple of minutes. We have a couple of questions. So one was, for instance, these examples show ideas that I would expect in a geopolitical database. Do you have examples that show how knowledge graphs work for companies' documentation? Yeah, I think that was, for instance, covered partly, at least by Joe's example of talent. A company's documentation graph is something you typically can also combine. You can combine the more specific part of a product landscape you have to model on your own. Yeah, that's something you typically do with a taxonomy tool like Pool Party. But then again, you might have several standards being used in the products, or probably locations again, or technologies in general, and such background knowledge you can link in by using knowledge graphs like DBpedia. So again, it's a pretty good example for how you can combine manually shaped graphs with some existing ones. Joe, do you want to add something on that?
No, I mean, just to say that it's important to, there's so many different ways you can use structured content, and it just is really important. The tools out there currently in the structured content space don't tend to use this kind of unified semantic approach to things. So that's why it's so important to have a unified kind of organization-wide taxonomy that is keeping track of all your different important stuff in the organization, your products, the parts of the products, the different names for them, and all of this kind of stuff. And that becomes the central source for everything that you are doing with your content across the enterprise. Perhaps just to add as well, in the case of Talend, which you just mentioned, and Andreas, so the idea is to combine the forum software and the kind of community software, which is not based on structured content, and bring that in a unified search with the structured content itself. So the team there are making great progress with this. It's going to be a really user-friendly kind of portal to access information, and even connects that for internal users with their own knowledge base behind the scenes. So it's a really good case of using taxonomy thoroughly across the board to bring everything together and keep everybody working in a consistent way.
There was another question. Joe, the structured data buzz is now at its peak. Not many are talking about not using structured data. I wonder what types of content wouldn't need structured data. Joe, what would you say?
Okay, in the sense of connecting content with semantic technologies, then I think all content could benefit from that, basically. But I would then make a further distinction. It's the distinction I made before between unstructured content and structured. It's a bit, you know, we use this word structured to mean various things. In the context I used it in, it was talking about kind of sub-document chunks, right? Where we're authoring in these kind of templatized environments, and we're authoring chunks of content, we're remixing them, filtering them, managing them, and so on. Now, I would say you need content that is kind of relevant over a fair period of time, and there's enough value in that content. You know, it's not just a few notes you're storing in your internal intranet or something like that. So it's got to be content that's of a certain value and that it's worth giving authors a bit of training on in using those systems for it to make sense to use structured content as such. That's that chunk-based content. But I would just go back to saying that in terms of using semantic technologies with content, unstructured or structured, then we should do that with all of our content.
I think there's no such a thing like structured content or semantics for free. Even if some vendors currently walk around and tell everybody that that can be generated automatically by clever machine learning algorithms, I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and I'm usually the person that walks into the room and disappoints people straight away to say it takes a bit of effort to do it and it's got to pay off. It can be really worthwhile, but let's not pretend that it comes for free, as you say.
Yeah, Joe, I think you and I, we're of this type of people who have to disappoint people or customers. But in any case,
the no men. We're not the yes men. We're sometimes the no men.
Unfortunately, but at least we know quite well what it means to work on such let's say structured content repositories and semantics around it, and we all know that we have to justify this extra effort very well.
Yeah.
And I think that also brings me back to the question. I think it's virtually any content could be structured content, but the question really is where does it pay off at the end of the project to create such, and that's the key question. There's another one, maybe a last one. Do you have a sentiment analysis plug-in with your automated content processing? If so, what level of sophistication does it provide? We have that, so PoolParty can provide semantic and sentiment analysis as well. And it goes a little bit maybe in a direction where, again, the contextualization around the found entities are important. So whenever you would like not just to classify documents and say, okay, that's green and that's red, or that's negative, that's positive, or whatever, but rather also analyze, so what are the typical semantic what's the neighborhood, what are the links around those concepts which indicate something is positive or negative, or maybe, you know, postings on Facebook which are intimidate people or whatever. If you find that out, you later then also just don't want only to have that information at hand and say, yes, that's negative and that's positive. Why happened that? So how is that related maybe to places, to organizations, to technologies, to brands and stuff? And that's what semantic technologies, again, can do very well. It can help you to do deep analytics around sentiment analysis later. So it's not just about classifying things, I would say. There's also a question, So that's, I think, important also to clarify what's the difference between Mecon and Font2XML.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's important to clarify. So Mecon is a services company. So we provide consulting and development and integration services. And we don't ourselves have a product that we're selling. So we work with partners such as Semantic Web company, Pool Party, and such as Font2XML. So products that we found to work particularly well with this technology. So Font2XML, if you look up their sites, they have lots of good information there. They also have a free sandbox that you can get started with, and certainly I'll be very happy to chat with you further about that if you'd like to contact me later. But yeah, basically we're services and Fonto is providing a product. It's the simplest way to say it.
Okay. So I think that was it, at least in the questions box. I will now stop the recording and wait for a minute or so, and we'll stay in the room. I will open up the microphone and would be happy to have a chat with you. So please, if you're not interested in a further discussion, I again would like to say thanks and goodbye. Hope you enjoyed. And for those who would like to stay in a minute or so, I'm going to open up the microphones.